It's a science fiction action thriller set in the present day, but it has a lot of futuristic overtones, time travel and robots.
You know, science fiction and all of that kind of stuff.
It's not very often that you get an action movie that's got a real strong story, like the Terminator.
Metal pieces, killing all of the people on the set.
Well, what are you talking about? Boom, 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 boom.
The down and dirty action exploitation film.
I wrote it that way on purpose,
Yeah.
The Terminator.
Back in the spring of 1982, Cameron drove an old beater handed down by his father to Bill Wisher's place.
Jim and I met in the early 73, I think. And there weren't that many people in the town who were interested in, science fiction and all of that kind of stuff.
After countless hours spent watching movies together and dissecting them afterward, Bill had the best ears James could count on to pitch his idea. That evening, they decided to team up on the screenplay.
What he was looking to do was to write something that would be so irresistible that no one would not let him direct it.
Wisher took on the early scenes, introducing Sarah Connor and the police station shootout, while Cameron tackled the rest. Then Cameron shared the idea with his agent. These ears, however, did not appreciate the concept, and the mouth suggested forgetting this nonsense and coming up with something else. The meeting ended with the agent's dismissal.
I think that you have to find some kind of inner strength that says, what I'm doing is right.
Gale Anne Hurd, once Roger Corman's assistant and a fellow veteran of B-movie battles with Cameron, was the third person to hear about the Terminator.
I knew Gale was the type of material that she knew and that she understood, and she knew low-budget effects. So she was a natural choice.
After Cameron's departure from Corman's studio, Hurd had climbed the ranks from production assistant to full-fledged producer on several cheap flicks. She saw something special in Cameron's pitch and offered to produce the movie.
We decided that we would collaborate on the film and bring it to the screen.
In a deal that was practically a steal, she bought the screenplay rights for just $1, promising Cameron that not only would the movie be made, but he would also direct it. It was a bargain that would catapult Cameron's career, although it meant he'd barely earn a dime from the franchise's future spoils. No action figures, video games, or theme park rides revenue. Cameron would later refer to this contract as his crash course in Hollywood economics. Rewind to 1982, when theme parks were the least of Cameron's worries.
I wouldn't sell the script unless I went with it as the director, and of course that was a turnoff for almost everybody.
We were turned down by every major studio. However, we did have one connection to Orion Pictures. Barbara Boyle and Francis Dole, who had worked for Roger Corman at New World Pictures, were both employed by Mike Medavoy. And we slipped the script to them, and they loved it.
Ever the resourceful producer, Hurd managed to get Orion Pictures on board to distribute the film, provided she found someone to back the production. Landing a distributor is usually tougher than finding a producer, since it almost guarantees some return on investment. That's why Hemdale Pictures decided to join the venture. They weren't expecting a masterpiece, they just wanted a slice of the box office pie. But after Cameron flooded the head of the company with sketches and detailed descriptions of a dystopian future filled with robots, they teamed up with HBO and nailed down a budget of $6 million.
This is brilliant.
Next up was casting. Kyle Reese was first up, the rugged rebel dedicated to defeating machines, yet still possessing a tenderness that wins over Sarah Connor. Orion Pictures was on the lookout for a charismatic rising star, someone recognizable in Europe as well. Curiously, the execs at Orion saw their ideal heroic lover in a towering figure of muscles, a man who had risen to fame through the pumping iron dock.
I mean, it's terrific, right? So, I'm in heaven.
At a glitzy Hollywood party, an Orion executive bumped into Arnold Schwarzenegger and, struck by his physical presence, promised to send him the script for the Terminator. Arnold was intrigued by the story and agreed to meet with the director. Cameron, however, was blindsided by the suggestion.
Fine. I hope he is.
The notion of Schwarzenegger as Reese seemed so off base that he agreed to lunch with Mr. Olympia primarily to keep his superiors happy.
Mike Medavoy called up and said I had to talk to Arnold to play Reese. I thought, okay, that's fine. That's a lame idea, frankly, but I'll talk to him.
Over a lunch, cloaked in more cigar smoke than a detective novel, they swapped tales about motorcycles and weaponry. As Cameron took in Arnold's chiseled jaw and intense stare, a light bulb went off. Arnold as Reese? Absolutely not. But as the Terminator? Bingo.
I came back to John Daly and said, look, it's not going to work as Reese, but I think you'd make a great Terminator.
You then did something really smart. You sent over to my office your painting that you did of Terminator.
Right.
And I looked at this painting and I said, I am the Terminator. And I called Lou, my agent, right away, and I called you and I said, I want to play the Terminator.
Yeah.
And then the deal was made.
Previously, Cameron had imagined the machines as kind of a spy with a forgettable face who could easily infiltrate the rebels.
The Terminator I always saw as this kind of cipher, this kind of anonymous guy.
He thought Henriksen, the sheriff from Piranha 2, was perfect, but in Arnold's emotionless gaze, he saw something more compelling. This epiphany not only shifted Lance to the role of Detective Vukovich,
Same shit.
but also robbed another muscular guy of the role of a lifetime.
And believe it or not, O.J. Simpson was at one point brought up to star as the Terminator.
No one was really hooked to O.J. Simpson playing Terminator because he could not be sold as a killing machine. Yeah.
Securing Schwarzenegger meant that filming would be delayed for at least a year and a half, as the actor was already preparing for his role in Conan the Barbarian.
We wound up in a one-year holding pattern, during which I practically starved to death. You know, my mom was sending me coupons in the mail that allowed me to buy 2 Big Macs for the price of 1. And using, cost-saving techniques like this, which proved beneficial once we actually started making the film, I was able to survive long enough to begin production.
Although Cameron was anxious, he had plenty to keep him busy. The role of Kyle Reese was given to the up-and-coming Michael Biehn.
It's a very complex character because at the beginning we look at him as a villain because he's going through the same movements and the same pattern of action as the Terminator. But then he has to change and become the hero, and then beyond the hero he has to become the romantic lead, if you will. So there's a transmigration of the character that happens.
This is great stuff. I could make a career out of this guy.
Michael came in to read for us, and he gave the best reading of any of the actors that we'd seen, but it was with a Southern accent. And we talked to his agent, very politely said, Michael's very good, but we really don't want him to seem so specific that he comes from the South.
And myself and my agents were like, well, what are you talking about? I'm not Southern. I'm from Nebraska. That's Middle America.
It turned out that he'd been reading for Cat on a Hot Tin Roof the morning, that morning of the reading, and he hadn't shaken the accent.
I used to always wonder what you were thinking at that moment.
The last major role to be filled was that of humanity's savior mother, Sarah Connor.
When we met Linda, she also had the ability to transcend the genre and not be someone who simply screams really well, but someone who was believable as the girl next door, who could ultimately become the mother who saves humanity. And that's not an easy transition.
Boy, that's a tough one.
To keep busy while waiting for Arnold to wrap up his sword-swinging duties in Conan, Cameron polished the Terminator script and pitched new project ideas to producers. Geiler and Hill's Brandywine Productions, who had the rights to a couple of sequels and were planning a Spartacus remake set in space, were not moved by Cameron's pitch about sandals and gladiators in the cosmos. As a parting suggestion, they urged him to consider an idea for a sequel to Alien, the very film that had redefined science fiction and which had inspired Cameron to pen his own script over a year earlier after working on a low-budget ripoff at Corman Studio.
What a magnificent piece of work. So I asked him if he wanted to write that, and he did.
A week later, Cameron returned to Geiler and Hill's office essentially with a complete film in hand and was immediately hired to write the screenplay for Aliens. On that same busy day, he was also tasked with writing a less ambitious but decently paid sequel for Rambo.
Thanks.
Within 3 months, Cameron was expected to finalize the Terminator, turn dark corridors of LV-426 into a xenomorph petting zoo, and send Stallone back for another sun-soaked tour in Vietnam.
Think you can handle it? Try.
That last gig stumbled a bit. Cameron was all set to pen a Rambo that mused on the existential dread of war, but Stallone was more in the mood for explosions and one-liners. Plus, Sly complained that all the juiciest lines were being hogged by the extras.
When he co-wrote Rambo along with Stallone, and I think that Cameron would tell you that most of what ended up on the screen is what Stallone wrote, I think.
Yeah.
The whirlwind of revisions was so intense that Cameron only managed to write only 90 pages for Aliens before it was time to head to his own film set. Fortunately, those 90 pages so impressed 20th Century Fox that they agreed to wait for the final draft and even promised Cameron the director's chair if his debut film would be successful.
Wait. I don't want to know.
The final prep for the Terminator involved putting together a visual effects team, which, given the tight budget, meant they had to get pretty creative. Fantasy II Film Effects was brought on board for the miniatures and stop-motion animation. The devastated future world was contained within a mere 150 square feet.
We first built a 3-foot platform, which all the miniatures would be shot on. And in the background were cutouts of ruined cities, and in the foreground you had ruined buildings and skulls and things of that nature.
Good old forced perspective came in handy here. Skulls in the foreground were normal sized, while those in the distance were no bigger than peas set against tiny ruins. There was even a grenade on the set the size of a pin cap, filmed in slow motion to visually enhance its weight, making it appear more realistic and substantial.
And to try and get it to go directly underneath the treads was a pain in the ass. I think we got it on the 26th take.
Just one hunter-killer model was built.
Hunter-killers. Patrol machines built in automated factories.
Any slight movement would sway it, ruining the take. So dozens of attempts were needed before this flying monster soared convincingly. The robot models were many too, with early CGI whizzes handling the laser shots.
And not just a single line that glowed. He wanted them to have a lot of depth, complexity. He had a color that he was really working for.
These tech pioneers also managed the command line interface from the Terminator POV. According to this interface, the Terminator's brain is powered by an MOS 6502 chip. That's the same as in the Apple II computer. So if machines ever start a war, we know who gave them their brains.
Sure.
But let's return to the special effects. Resistance fighters were added into scenes using rear projection. Pre-filmed material was projected onto a screen while actors performed with a minimal set. The same method was used for scenes featuring Sarah Connor fleeing from an explosion.
Jim Cameron originally wanted to blow a full-size tanker truck up, but he couldn't because where he was shooting it in downtown Los Angeles was in front of the police armory. So what Gene had to do was create the entire atmosphere in miniature, 1/6 scale, in the front parking lot of Fantasy II in Burbank, and then blow up a miniature tanker truck.
The end of the explosion had to match what had already been shot 10 days before in principle. So we had to blow it up and have it end up looking like the wreckage.
The first time we tried this, the gas was loaded, the bombs were loaded, the wiring was all done, the cameras are ready. We got 3 cameras on it and we're shooting 120 frames per second. Lights were ready, everything is ready. And what happened was the cable that was attached to the front axle pulled it so hard that it just ripped it out from underneath the cab. And there are the wheels, and I'd already started setting off the explosion, so I had to set it off the rest of the way. We put it out, and there was a collective groan amongst everybody on the set. So we then right away started working on another model, and 2 days later, we got the shot.
While Fantasy II Film Effects certainly brought their A-game to the set of the Terminator, they weren't the wizards behind the real magic. James knew that the key to the film's success lay in the seamless blend of makeup and animatronics. And when it came to the top dog in this field, nobody held a candle to Dick Smith. This guy scared the pants off of audiences in The Exorcist, transformed Brando into Vito Corleone, and splattered squibs of fake blood all over the sets of Taxi Driver, The Deer Hunter, and a slew of other iconic flicks.
He was the one who agreed to talk with us, read the script, and then said, you know, I'm not the right guy for this. The right guy for this is Stan Winston.
Recently Oscar nominated for the quirky Heartbeeps.
Some people use a Rolls Royce to plow turnips.
Though initially skeptical, it was Stan Winston who would turn Cameron's wild fantasies into tangible realities. They would become not just collaborators, but comrades in arms, eventually founding a visual effects studio peppered with Academy Awards in Stan's workshop.
And I was extremely fortunate in that I had amazingly talented group of guys to work with, whose names will remain off the screen, and no one will ever know who they are because I'm taking all the credit.
But back in '82, those glory days were still far on the horizon. Cameron first dazzled Winston with robot sketches so detailed they looked like ready-to-build blueprints. Stan joked that James was the best artist who ever worked for him.
Jim, I honestly, but why don't you give me a little sketch here and sort of milk out the sketches from Jim Cameron. Go, okay, we'll work on that, and then I could go over to the guys. We're done. We got it. Let's just here's the body cavity, and here are the hips, and here's the shoulder. And by the time all was said and done, Jim had sketched every detail of the endoskeleton, and thank God for him. And then I ended up taking credit for it all, which I will continue to do.
In scenes where the machine self-repairs and pops out an eye, animatronics controlled by a skilled team of puppeteers took the stage. Though today that head might not win any awards for realism, back in '84, it chilled and thrilled in equal measure.
A couple of sculptures were actually done. We used one of them in the truck at the end when he was driving.
I would be looking at photographs, and I myself would ask myself, is this me or is this a dummy? And only and out of 10 times when I was asked the question, I must have been wrong 6 or 7 times. So this is how close this was, or exactly a resemblance of my face. So it was really amazing. Even in a film, there was no way of telling.
The interesting thing is that as good as the heads turned out, the makeup turned out actually better than we thought it would. And I think allowed Jim some more freedom as a filmmaker to shoot, for Arnold to be able to act more.
Get out.
And then a couple of close-up shots just to sell the depth inside that skull. And we made a huge, oversized endo eye area that we used for close-ups for the eye operation, and also allowed us to show the irising using actually a camera lens for that piece. So those were all the various pieces that we used for the endo.
And the scene that truly steals the show is when the Terminator, let's just say, steps out of his skin. For the wider shots, they restored a stop-motion animation. Despite their best efforts, the 100-foot main puppet just wouldn't walk on its own. However, the stop-motion looked so unreal that Cameron kept it to a minimum. Instead, they crafted separate models of different robot body parts, which, through clever editing, made its existence believable on screen.
Knew that we could get some walking and some movement by creating an upper torso puppet of the Terminator that would be carried on the shoulders of a puppeteer who affected his walk and his limp and his dragging leg. Then we added our animatronic techniques to head and eye movement. We also built a full standing endoskeleton that Jim could shoot from head to toe, and the shots where he's blown in half and he's being dragged along. As far as the rigs we had mechanical insert arms. We developed our first robotic hands, which we would use as inserts and grab the grating and pull him forward. We also had our exploding dummy endo. It was a urethane, and the reason we had to make it out of urethane and we chromed that urethane was from a safety factor. We didn't want metal pieces, killing all of the people on the set.
In addition to the challenges of bringing the director's visions to life, there were also mundane problems.
We shot Downtown LA, the worst parts of LA, at night, during the summer. So it was hot, it was humid, it was dirty, smelly, all those alleys and stuff. It was nasty. But it worked for the movie.
Right before we started shooting, Linda Hamilton broke her ankle, and we were concerned and that she'd be able to actually carry out the performance that was essential.
The schedule had to be rearranged so that scenes requiring her to run were shot last. Even walking was a struggle, but fortunately, she didn't have to act in moments where she was in pain. Later, Arnold struggled with a shot involving a motorcycle turn, so Cameron himself jumped on the bike and demonstrated how to do it. Schwarzenegger wasn't asked to do much. In most of the action scenes, a stunt double wearing a Terminator mask replaced him. This was Peter Kent's first job in Hollywood.
I was sent out to meet James Cameron first as a lighting stand-in. Okay. And then Jim took a look at me and said, you have the job. By the way, have you done stunts before? And I said, gee, I may not have this job if I don't say yes. And basically that was it.
And I walked into the set and he was sitting in the corner and he looked at me up and down and he said, nah, too tall. And so I figured that, that was the end of my job. And I turned around and he goes, I'm just joking. Sit down here and have a cigar.
The next thing, I found myself on set being asked to fly through windows and get set on fire. The coordinator eventually sussed me out and said, you have no idea what you're doing, do you? And that basically saved my life because he helped train me.
The final stage of production was the soundtrack by composer Brad Fiedel.
He did the whole score in his garage. It was a cool garage. I mean, he had a lot of good gear.
Some of the most advanced devices of the time played the opening theme, The Machine's Heartbeat.
Part of the nature of the score is me trying to get control of the machines. While the machines are trying to get control of the people in the movie, I'm sitting here desperately trying to get control of these machines. So if my Prophet 10 was going boom, 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 and the other thing was going
Indeed, Cameron managed to make a real film, not some piranha flick or Star Wars knockoff, but something truly significant. That's why the reaction from Orion Pictures felt like a slap.
The studio perceived it as a down and dirty action exploitation film.
Like a Charles Bronson film, 1 week in and out.
Crazy son of a bitch.
I made the statement that as a science fiction film, we should sell it on its own merits because that's a very particular audience. He said, this is not a science fiction film. You can't sell this as a science fiction film. Star Wars is science fiction. If you promise that, people are going to feel betrayed. If they go into a theater and you're telling them it's science fiction and it's this. I said, well, it does involve time travel and robots, two of the biggest mainstays of science fiction. All science fiction films aren't necessarily about space travel. He didn't get it.
Shut up! Still don't get it, do you?
Fearing that reviews would destroy its commercial potential, they held only one press screening and limited the advertising campaign to just 7 days. However, the few critics who did catch the show kicked off a wave of applause. The Los Angeles Times praised the thriller and its ferocity. Similar reactions came from the New York Times and Newsweek. And Time magazine even added The Terminator to its list of the top 10 films of the year.
It was impossible to anticipate that the film would get the kind of almost universal positive reviews that we got, and that the film would open up and maintain the same box office week in and week out for a number of weeks.
Raking in about $80 million worldwide on a shoestring budget of $6 million. What was once pegged as potential B-movie fodder morphed into bona fide sensation, later becoming a VHS titan that eclipsed its theatrical earnings. By 2008, The Terminator had been enshrined in the National Film Registry as an unequivocal classic.
When I wrote it, I probably thought it had stood the chance of being a success. I wrote it that way on purpose, but you never really believe that it's going to happen.
Cameron, meanwhile, soaked up the acclaim, tied the knot with Gale Anne Hurd, gave countless interviews, and cue the dramatic music, faced an accusation of plagiarism. Oh, the thorn in this tale? Harlan Ellison, who was convinced that Cameron had stolen his ideas from 2 episodes of the TV series Outer Limits.
Some years ago, before Terminator came out, I began to hear from people, gee, the script
that they're going to shoot that reads an awful like your script for Soldier that you did on Outer Limits years ago.
Between the future warriors of Soldier accidentally time-traveling to our era and the mechanical hand in Demon with a glass hand that seemed to prefigure the Terminator, Ellison saw more than a coincidence.
So we went to, at this point, we went to Hemdale and Orion, and we said, I'm afraid we got him with the smoking gun. Now, do you want to do something about this, or do you want us to whip your ass in open court? I mean, perfectly happy to do it either way. Well, they settled.
Orion decided to cut Ellison a check and tack his name onto the credits to avoid a fuss. Cameron, none too pleased with this peace offering, didn't yet have the Hollywood heft to throw his weight around. Years later, his verdict on the matter was blunt and unapologetic. Harlan Ellison is a parasite who can kiss my ass.
Fuck you, asshole.
Go ahead and terminate that like button and leave a comment below. Not for us, but to fight the machine, or algorithms in this case.
It can't be bargained with. It can't be reasoned with. It doesn't feel pity.